Greetings, this is Brother Eli with another episode of Bible Truth Revealed. Today's topic is, should Israelites have anal and oral sex? That's, should Israelites have anal and oral sex? There are many Hebrew Sodomite camps that actively encourage their members to engage in acts of sodomy. They do this by twisting the scriptures and by limiting the definition of sodomy to sexual relations between members of the same gender. Today, we will explore the most comprehensive definition of the word sodomy, and I will demonstrate how this abomination has led to the defilement of the children of Israel. In this teaching, I will address the following. 1. What exactly is sodomy? 2. The role of pornography in normalising sodomy. 3. New Testament passages used to justify sodomy. 4. The dangers of anal sex. 5. Old Testament passages used to encourage oral sex. 6. The dangers of oral sex. And 7. Responses to common objections. So firstly, what exactly is sodomy? On www.biblestudy.org, the question is asked, what is sodomy? I shall read the quote from www.biblestudy.org. It says, "The word sodomy does not appear in the King James Version of the Bible, as well as the NKJV, NASB, NIV, and at least several other translations. According to dictionary.com, this English word did not exist before the 1300s AD. So we see here that the word sodomy does not appear in the Bible. Therefore, as it is nowhere to be found in the scriptures, the definition of this word is also not in the scriptures. We will be using other reliable sources to explore the meaning of the word sodomy. The Webster's 1828 dictionary defines the word sodomy as a crime against nature. That is, a crime against nature. In Genesis chapter 19, we see that the men of Sodom wanted to commit a sexual crime against the angels who were staying in the home of Lot. They wanted to sexually abuse these angels. The word sodomy comes from the word Sodom, and it is used to describe a range of sexual crimes. We will discover shortly that any sexual activity that is contrary to what the Most High intended when He created our reproductive organs is considered to be sodomy. I will read Genesis chapter 19, verse 24 from the Brenton Septuagint translation. Genesis chapter 19, verse 24 shows us the judgment that the Most High poured out upon the people of Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighboring cities because of the crimes against nature that these people were committing. It reads thus, "And the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." That should give us an idea of how the Most High feels about sodomy. Now let's consider a more detailed definition of the word sodomy. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, sodomy is non-coital carnal copulation We'll break that down shortly. It continues. The term is understood in history, literature, and law in several senses. Number one, as denoting any homosexual practices between men, in allusion to the biblical story of Sodom. So any type of sexual practices between two men is considered sodomy. Number two, as denoting anal intercourse. Now notice this does not say between men or between women. It doesn't mention a gender. That's because any type of anal intercourse is considered sodomy. Number three, as synonymous with bestiality or zoophilia. That is, sexual relations between human beings and animals. So having sex with an animal is an act of sodomy. And number four, as comprehending a number of other sexual activities, ranging from sexual contact with minors, so that's having sex with children, that is considered sodomy, to oral genital contacts and oral intercourse between adults. This means that oral sex is also considered sodomy based on the most comprehensive definition of the term sodomy. So in history, literature, and law, sodomy is understood in all these different senses. What Hebrew Sodomite groups do is they limit the definition of sodomy to homosexual practices between men, which is sense number one. But today we are looking at the full definition of the word sodomy. Although the word sodomy refers to all these crimes against nature and not only homosexual activity, Hebrew Sodomite camp leaders twist the scriptures to justify their own abominable sexual behavior. They are very quick to turn to Hebrews chapter 13 verse 4 in the Christian Bible, and I'll read that from the King James Version of the Christian Bible. It says, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers, God will judge. They say that as long as you are not being a whoremonger by sleeping around, and as long as you're not being an adulterer by being unfaithful to your spouse, anything goes. They say that the bed is undefiled means they can do whatever they want to do in their bedroom and it's perfectly fine. Now let's take a closer look at the definition of sodomy according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. It is generally accepted among Israelites that sexual crimes against animals and children are abominable. As such, I will focus on the other acts that constitute sodomy. Let's begin with non-coital carnal copulation. Carnal copulation is simply another term for sexual intercourse. So what does the word non-coital mean? Non-coital means not coital, and the word coital comes from the word coitus. So let's look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary to get the definition of coitus. The definition of coitus is physical union of male and female genitalia accompanied by rhythmic movements. So that's the putting together of the male genitalia, which is the penis, and the female genitalia, which is the vagina, accompanied by rhythmic movements. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines the word genitalia as the organs of the reproductive system, especially the external genital organs. So that makes it clear that it is referring to the penis and the vagina. Therefore, coitus is the physical union of the penis and the vagina, accompanied by rhythmic movements. So we know that non-coital carnal copulation means any sexual activity in which either the penis or the vagina is not involved. This is sodomy. For example, the union of the penis and the anus is sodomy because the vagina is not involved. Similarly, the union of the mouth and the vagina is sodomy because the penis is not involved. Sodomy has been normalized in today's society to make same-sex couples feel comfortable in their sin. They argue that it is perfectly acceptable to remove either the penis or the vagina from the sexual equation. Nonsense! In the eyes of the Most High, this is still an abomination and will never be acceptable. Number 2, any homosexual practices between men. So this is sodomy. Leviticus chapter 18 verse 22 in the Brenton Septuagint translation, that's Leviticus chapter 18 verse 22, reads thus: "And thou shalt not lie with a man as with a woman, for it is an abomination." Leviticus chapter 20 verse 13, that's chapter 20, verse 13 says, "And whoever shall lie with a male as with a woman, they have both wrought abomination. Let them die the death. They are guilty." And this is how we know that such abominations will never be acceptable in the eyes of the Most High. Number 3, anal intercourse. Although many Israelite men understand that sodomy is a crime against nature, they use 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 4 in the Christian Bible to browbeat their wives into allowing themselves to be sodomized. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 4 in the King James Version of the Christian Bible reads thus: "The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband." They say, see, you have no power over your own body, so I can do whatever I want to you. It continues, "And likewise also the husband has not power of his own body, but the wife." But what's interesting is, because they've already decided that it would be sodomy for the man to be penetrated, they say this means that I, the husband, can penetrate my wife, but my wife can't penetrate me. That's quite convenient, isn't it? Well, any man who has anal intercourse with his wife is by definition a sodomite. This is non-coital carnal copulation because the vagina is not involved in the act of anal intercourse. Let's move on to the role of pornography in normalizing sodomy. During chattel slavery, the Christian slave masters brutally sodomized our forefathers, our foremothers, and their children. Today, their descendants flood the internet with pornography in which sodomy is portrayed as the norm. Many Israelites, unaware of the enemy's tactics, look at pornography, then attempt to replicate these same vile acts with their spouses without realizing that they are committing the abomination of sodomy. Many Israelite men and women have been seduced into thinking that this is normal sexual behavior. I have heard Hebrew Sodomite camp leaders insist that it is only abominable if the man is being penetrated. As far as the Sodomites are concerned, they can anally penetrate their wives whenever they want to, because Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to 24 says that their wives must submit to them in everything. So we have seen that the first New Testament passage that is used to justify sodomy is Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. Which suggests that the marriage bed is undefiled, and which Hebrew Sodomites interpret to mean that they can do whatever they want in their marriage bed. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to 24 is the second passage that is used, which says that the wives must be subject to their husbands in everything. And they interpret that to mean that she must agree to be anally penetrated. Yet again, we see the Christian New Testament leading the children of Israel astray. Now we move on to the dangers of anal sex. On www.health.com, there is an article entitled, "How Risky is Anal Sex?" A gynecologist explains. In this article, gynecologist Lauren F. Streicher, MD, director of the Center for Sexual Medicine and Menopause at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University, makes a very clear statement that Hebrew Sodomite men would be wise to consider the next time they want to anally penetrate their wives. Quote number 1 from this article is as follows. Let's face it, the anus was not made for intercourse. It's supposed to be a one-way passage, Dr. Streicher points out. The vagina, on the other hand, has a thick, elastic, accordion-like lining designed to stretch to accommodate a penis or a baby. So that's a gynecologist stating that the anus was not made for intercourse, but the vagina was. Quote number 2 from the article says, rectal gonorrhea, anal chlamydia, and HIV are all real risks. According to the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, anal sex is the highest risk sexual behavior for HIV infections. But anal sex is perhaps most likely to transmit the human papillomavirus, or HPV. HPV can cause anal warts and anal cancer. And we're going to hear a lot more about HPV in this teaching. Quote number 3 says, then there's pain, bleeding, and fecal incontinence. Poop in your pants is not a nice thing to talk about, says Dr. Streicher. She points to new research from a team at Northwestern University that found that women who considered anal part of their regular bedroom behavior were more likely to say it changed the consistency of their stools and report both urinary and fecal incontinence. So this is for those Hebrew Sodomite men who insist on anally penetrating their wives and say it's only sodomy if the man is being penetrated. This says that women who considered anal part of their regular bedroom behavior reported that it changed the consistency of their stools and they had both urinary and fecal incontinence. In other words, they suffered from pee and poop in their pants. If this is what you want for your wife, then continue to sodomize her. On www.mayoclinic.org, under the heading Anal Cancer, this is what quote 1 says. Anal cancer is closely related to a sexually transmitted infection called human papillomavirus or HPV. This is the same HPV that we mentioned a moment ago. It continues. Evidence of HPV is detected in the majority of anal cancers. HPV is thought to be the most common cause of anal cancers. So when you Hebrew Sodomite men want to anally penetrate your wife, think about HPV, which is the most common cause of anal cancers. Quote number 2 says this. People who engage in receptive anal sex have an increased risk of anal cancer. Notice it does not say men who engage. It said people. That includes women. So this nonsense about it's only wrong if the man is being penetrated is exactly that. Nonsense. People who engage in receptive anal sex, that includes women who are anally penetrated, have an increased risk of anal cancer. Now we move on to oral genital contacts and oral intercourse between adults. In other words, oral sex. Just like with anal sex, many Israelites participate in oral sex as a result of copying what they see in pornography. Both men and women have been deceived into believing that this is normal sexual behavior. For many of them, this can be a deal breaker in a relationship. Both men and women who discover that oral sex is an abomination, then lovingly inform their spouse, are often threatened with divorce. In other words, if you don't perform oral sex on me, I'm leaving. One well-known Hebrew Sodomite leader even told the men in his congregation that if their wives refuse oral sex, they should seek it elsewhere. This is the state of unrighteousness among Israelites today. Many Hebrew Sodomite leaders are so drunk on pornography that they start seeing oral sex everywhere, including in the scriptures. Those of us who have not been bewitched by the oppressor's pornography can see that there is absolutely no mention of oral sex in the Hebrew scriptures. None. Zilch. Nada. Not once is oral sex mentioned in the Holy Scriptures. I will now examine 3 passages in the King James Version of the Bible which Hebrew Sodomites use to justify having oral sex. We will discover that Hebrew Sodomites have been so blinded by pornography that they do not recognize metaphors in the scriptures. Instead, they see oral sex wherever they look. So first, let's define the word metaphor. In the Merriam-Webster dictionary, under the heading, "What is metaphor?" it says this: "You're a peach." We've all heard the expression, and it's a good example of what we call metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase denoting one kind of object or action is used in place of another to suggest a likeness or analogy between them. The person being addressed in "you're a peach" is being equated with a peach, with the suggestion being that the person is pleasing or delightful in the way that a peach is pleasing and delightful. All this is saying is when someone's referred to as something that they are not literally, it is to make a comparison between the person and that thing. So if I say to someone, "you a peach," I don't mean that they are literally a peach. I mean that they are pleasing and delightful in the way that a peach is pleasing and delightful. That's a metaphor. The scriptures contain many metaphors. And whenever Hebrew Sodomites see metaphors, their minds go into the gutter and they start thinking about oral sex. So I'm going to explain 3 passages from the scriptures that Hebrew Sodomites insist are oral sex, and I'm going to demonstrate that that is not the case. There are others, but once Hebrew Sodomites stop watching pornography and start actually paying attention to the scriptures, they'll be able to see clearly, to recognize that the others also are not talking about oral sex. So let's start with Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 3. That's Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 3, and I'll be reading from the King James Version of the Bible. It reads thus: "As the apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons. I sat down under his shadow with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste." So Hebrew Sodomites interpret this as, I, the woman, sat down under the man and performed oral sex on him, and his sexual organ is the fruit that was sweet to her taste. That's what happens when you watch too much pornography. Now I'm going to explain this, demonstrating it's a metaphor. Remember, "you're a peach" does not mean that you are a peach. It means that you're being compared to a peach because you are delightful and pleasing like a peach. "As the apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons." The beloved is being compared to an apple tree. And just like the apple tree is special and delightful among the trees of the wood that may not produce fruit as delightful as apples, my beloved is like that among the sons. So the apple tree is more special to this writer than the other trees of the wood, and the beloved is more special to this writer than the other sons of Israel. Why? Because this is her lover. He is more special. He is being compared to the apple tree. It continues, "I sat down under his shadow with great delight." Why under his shadow? Because he is being compared to the apple tree. She's saying she sat down under his shadow the same way that one would sit down under the shadow of an apple tree, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. Just like the apple tree produces fruit, which is the apple, and that is sweet to her taste. She's saying that that which is provided by her beloved is sweet to her taste. Well, what does he provide? He provides wealth. His shadow is referring to his protection. His fruit is referring to his wealth. So he is being compared to the apple tree and the things that he provides, which is protection, provision, wealth, substance are satisfying to this woman, the same way that the apple is satisfying to the woman, the apple that comes from the tree. That's how metaphors work. This is not talking about oral sex. Ecclesiasticus chapter 26, verses 10 to 12. Ecclesiasticus is Sirach in the Apocrypha. I'll be reading chapter 26, verses 10 to 12. It reads thus: If thy daughter be shameless, keep her in straitly, lest she abuse herself through overmuch liberty. So if your daughter has no common decency, if she likes to play the harlot, you got to keep an eye on her. 11. Watch over an impudent eye, and marvel not if she trespass against thee. So don't be surprised if she starts running around. You got to watch her carefully. Verse 12. She will open her mouth as a thirsty traveler when he has found a fountain, and drink of every water near her. So Hebrew Sodomites say she's opening her mouth to receive every penis that comes, therefore this is oral sex. No, this is a metaphor. She will open her mouth as a thirsty traveler when he has found a fountain. This woman is being compared to a thirsty traveler. How does a thirsty traveler behave when he has found a fountain of water? Does he not drink from it? This is simply saying that this woman is sexually thirsty. And we know that that's what it means because it tells us that she's shameless, that she would abuse herself through overmuch liberty, that she would trespass against her father by doing what? Playing the whore. This woman is thirsty like a thirsty traveler when he has found a fountain of water. He drinks of every water that's nearby, so she would satisfy her thirst by sleeping with every man in her vicinity. This is not telling us the actual act that she performs. It's not saying that she is going to perform oral sex on every man that she sees, only that she'll be more than happy to play the whore, to have sexual intercourse with every man nearby. That's the way metaphors work. It continues, by every hedge will she sit down and open her quiver against every arrow. So now the quiver is a metaphor for her vagina. And the arrow is a metaphor for the penis. And this demonstrates the understanding that this shameless hussy would open her legs for every man that passes by so he can put his arrow in her quiver, his penis in her vagina. This has nothing to do with oral sex. But Hebrew Sodomites do not understand metaphors. All they understand is pornography. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 20. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 20 in the Christian KJV says, Such is the way of an adulterous woman. She eateth and wipeth her mouth, and saith, I've done no wickedness. Now I was genuinely surprised when I heard Hebrew Sodomites using this to justify oral sex, because the expression eat and wipe your mouth is very common in my culture. I grew up hearing this repeatedly. It simply means that someone does something, then they get rid of the evidence so that it's not clear that they did it. It never occurred to me that that had anything to do with oral sex. But Hebrew Sodomites would immediately run to oral sex because their brains are filled with pornography and they want to justify their sodomy using the scriptures. Let's turn to the Brenton Septuagint translation and see what it says in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 20. Does it support the idea that this is oral sex, or is it demonstrating that this is someone who, having done something wrong, gets rid of the evidence to make it seem as though she has done nothing wrong. Proverbs chapter 30 verse 20 in the Brenton Septuagint translation reads thus: "Such is the way of an adulterous woman." So far it's exactly the same as the KJV, and we know an adulterous woman is a woman who goes out and commits sexual infidelity. She is unfaithful to her husband. She's sleeping with a man or with men who are not her husband. It continues, who, having washed herself from what she has done, says she has done nothing amiss. So here, she's not eating and wiping her mouth. She's washing herself. She's getting rid of the evidence so her husband would not know what she has done, and she says she's done nothing wrong. Now, it's perfectly fine to translate this, she eateth and wipeth her mouth, because those of us who are not blinded by pornography, who are familiar with this idiomatic expression, are aware that it means the same thing as having washed herself from what she has done. It means she has gotten rid of the evidence. Both of these are saying the same thing, and they have nothing to do with oral sex. Now let's learn about the dangers of oral sex. On www.cancerhealth.com, there is an article entitled "Oral Sex Increases Oral Cancer Risk by 80%. Quote 1 states this: "Researchers at Johns Hopkins University have found that people who engage in oral sex have an 80% higher risk of developing mouth and throat cancers." Yet Hebrew Sodomites want us to believe that it's okay for us to have oral sex based on their twisting of the scriptures. Now, quote number 2 from the same source, cancerhealth.com, demonstrates exactly why Israelites should never trust our enemies. Quote number 2 says this: "No one should take this to mean don't have oral sex. H. Hunter Hansfield, MD, a professor emeritus of medicine at the University of Washington Center for AIDS and STD, told U.S. News and World Report." So this joker is saying that although oral sex increases your chances of getting oral cancer, which is mouth and throat cancer, by 80%, this doesn't mean you shouldn't have oral sex. This is what he continues. Rather, he said, the results underscore the importance of HPV vaccination for preteen girls and boys. Here we see again HPV. That's the same thing we spoke about earlier that causes anal cancer. It also causes oral cancer. And this joker that they call doctor is saying, carry on having oral sex. Just get the vaccination. Does that sound familiar? Trust us. Just get the vaccination. It continues. The HPV vaccine is now approved for men and women up to age 45. Does that also sound familiar? Just get the vaccination and everything will be okay. Continue being a sodomite. We have a vaccine for that. On www.throatcancerfoundation.org is a throat cancer patient's guide. There's a quote that says this: "Throat cancers caused by HPV include cancers of the oropharynx, which includes the back of the tongue and the tonsils, and the larynx. The number of throat cancer cases caused by HPV has increased sharply over the past 20 years. And this trend looks set to continue into the future." So they are saying that compared to 20 years ago, there's a lot more throat cancer caused by HPV, and that this is not going to stop in the future. It will continue to increase sharp Now, a little bit of research will show that this sharp increase in throat cancers is consistent with the rise in the availability of internet pornography over the past 20 years. The oppressor has deceived the masses into thinking that oral sex is normal. As they engage in this abominable act, they are likely to contract HPV, which eventually develops into throat cancer. So the more oral sex you have, the more likely you are to get HPV, which leads to throat cancer. Now let's look at some common objections to avoiding oral sex and responses to these common objections. Objection number one: oral sex is safer than vaginal intercourse. Now, first of all, I want to make it very clear that having only penile vaginal intercourse as the Most High intended does not guarantee that one will not contract a sexually transmitted illness. However, avoiding whoredom is usually enough to significantly reduce the risk of contracting such illnesses. So, for the objection, oral sex is safer than vaginal intercourse, I will read from www.medicalnewstoday.com, where there's an article entitled Oral Sex STI Risk Charts, Transmission and Prevention. Quote 1 says this: oral sex carries a risk of contracting and transmitting certain STIs. Oral sex includes fellatio, which is oral sex on a penis, cunnilingus, which is oral sex on a vulva, and rimming, which is oral sex on an anus. Yes, such filthy practice. Quote number 2 says, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the following STIs can spread through oral sex. 1. Chlamydia. 2. Gonorrhea. 3. Syphilis. 4. Herpes. 5. Human papillomavirus, which is HPV. There it goes again. And 6. HIV. This doesn't sound very safe to me. It's also important to note that the risk charts on medicalnewstoday.com show that these illnesses can be contracted from both giving and receiving oral sex. There are many people who believe that they can only contract these illnesses by giving oral sex, therefore they don't give, but they're happy to receive. Well, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but if you receive oral sex, you can also get the same illnesses as a person who is giving oral sex. Objection number 2. My spouse and I are faithful to each other, so we don't have to worry about getting HPV or throat cancer. I will respond from www.throatcancerfoundation.org, the Throat Cancer Patient's Guide, HPV and Throat Cancer. Quote 1 says, an HPV infection definitely does not mean that you or your partner have been unfaithful. What this is saying is, even if you and your partner are faithful to each other, you can still get HPV. Quote number 2, the fact that your cancer was caused by HPV does not automatically mean that you or your partner have had large numbers of sexual partners, behavior that is sometimes called promiscuity. So in other words, you and your partner being faithful to each other does not guarantee that you will not get HPV, which leads to throat cancer. HPV does not only affect people who are promiscuous. Quote number 3. There is no test that can tell you when you were infected by HPV. However, it is likely that you caught HPV many years before your cancer diagnosis, perhaps as many as 30 years before. It is also impossible to know who you caught HPV from. So if your partner was with someone else up to 30 years before, you can get HPV from your partner who has HPV without even knowing it. So simply being faithful to your partner and your partner being faithful to you does not mean that you will not get HPV and throat cancer when you engage in the abominable act of oral sex. Objection number 3. My spouse and I don't have any sexually transmitted illnesses, so we won't get HPV or throat cancer from having oral sex. In other words, we are clean. So we can have oral sex and we don't have to worry about HPV or throat cancer. I will continue to respond from www.throatcancerfoundation.org, the Throat Cancer Patient's Guide, HPV and Throat Cancer. Quote number 4 says, you will not know you have caught HPV. So you can have HPV now and have no idea. When you are infected, there are no symptoms like a fever. So saying that you have no sexually transmitted illnesses, so you won't get HPV or throat cancer from oral sex, is not necessarily correct. Objection number 4. We always use a condom when having oral sex, so we have nothing to worry about. Quote number 5 from the Throat Cancer Patient's Guide, HPV and Throat Cancer says this: using a condom makes it less likely that someone will catch or pass on HPV, but it does not completely remove the risk. So you can use a condom and still get HPV, which leads to throat cancer. It continues. Oral sex is the most likely cause of throat cancers that have been caused by HPV. Objection number 5. My husband doesn't care for oral sex, but if he doesn't give it to me, I'm leaving him. The Throat Cancer Patient's Guide, HPV and Throat Cancer, says this in quote number 6. Both men and women are at risk of throat cancer, but men are more likely to be affected. That means if you want to leave your husband because he's not giving you oral sex, he should tell you, get the hell out, because he is more likely to get throat cancer than you are. Quote number 7. Some doctors think men may be more at risk from giving oral sex to a woman because the vulva is more infectious than the penis. So if you are a man and you're listening to this and your wife is saying, if you don't give me oral sex, I'm leaving, let the whore go. Do not engage in sodomy to appease your wife. By this point, you should be wondering, how is it possible to get HPV that leads to throat cancer if I only ever have sex with one person and we always use a condom while having oral sex? The answer is simple. The HPV that leads to throat cancer is caused by oral sex itself. The genitals do not belong in or near the mouth. This is sodomy. There are certain bacteria on the penis, on the vagina, and on the anus that do not belong in or near the mouth. By breaking that natural law, you can easily contract the HPV that leads to throat cancer. In conclusion, Israelites must not allow our enemies to set the standard when it comes to what we do in the bedroom. We are a holy people. We must not allow the oppressor to cause us to normalize sodomy and try to justify such abominable acts that can destroy us both spiritually and physically. The debilitating medical consequences of anal and oral sex make it clear that the Most High never intended for His holy people to engage in such activities. I pray that this warning is clear and that truly righteous Israelites will repent before it's too late. And with that, I say, Shalom. And remember, if you find these teachings beneficial and would like to hear more, please like, share, and subscribe.